So, welcome back to part 2 of our series on emotionally intelligent leadership. Last time we talked a little bit about leadership in general, and we started to unpick this idea of emotional intelligence and where it might fit in. Now we're going to look at the specific model that Salovey and Mayer produced as part of their science of emotional intelligence, and it's called the 4-branch model. And it has 4 branches, naturally enough. The first one is around identifying emotions, then using emotions, then understanding emotions, and managing emotions. And it largely runs in that sequence, although you can join the model at any point in real life. You join the model at any point, but it's better understood as a series, as a sequence. So let's pick into that a bit. The first part is identify emotions. So that's to do with whether or not you pick this stuff up. It's a bit like being in a foreign country and hearing people speaking a foreign language. You know that it has meaning, but you just can't understand what the meaning is. So people who aren't particularly clued in on perceiving emotions, they know that there's stuff going on around them, they just can't interpret it. So how well do you know how you're feeling from time to time, from moment to moment? How have you been feeling in the last 24 hours, the last 7 days, the last 20 minutes? What about the people around you? Do you pick up how people are feeling by watching them? Even when you're connecting online, from the tone of voice, from somebody's face on a screen, from interaction in a shop, in a queue? Do you know whether people are stressed, whether they're happy, whether they're upset, whether they're engaged, whether they're angry, whether they're frustrated? And how do you determine all of that? People who are good at perceiving emotions are really dialed in, and they pick up in the moment what's happening. So you've just got off a conference call, a Teams hangout, or 4 or 5 people on a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting or a hangout meeting, and you ring your friend and you go, "Oh wow, Larry was in a really bad mood there, wasn't he?" And your friend says, "Well, what meeting were you in? Where are you getting that from?" So are you the person who comes out of the meeting and tells people, "Wow, did you notice that? Did you pick up on that little thing that was going on?" Or are you the person being told? People who are really good at perceiving emotions tend to be picking this stuff up and telling other people, and then reacting in the moment. For a lot of us who are kind of in the middle ground, we kind of pick this stuff up, and afterwards, if you point out to me, "Oh, did you notice that Larry was in a bad mood?" I'll think about it and I'll say, "Now that you pointed out to me, I get it. I can see okay, now that makes sense. The bit of the meeting when this happened and then that happened, now that you point out to me that he was put in a bad mood by the previous comment, yeah, I get it. That all makes sense to me now." So I can work it out after the fact. I can, think my way through after the fact what happened in the meeting, but I'm just not switched on enough in the moment to pick it up. Whereas people who are very high on this perceived skill pick it up in the moment. They're also very good at distinguishing real from fake emotion. So to understand where you sit on this continuum, do you tend to pick these things up, or do you tend to have to be told? You'll notice if you speak to your nearest and dearest, family dinner parties. Have you come out of a family dinner party and your wife has said, "Oh God, did you notice that Pat and Mary aren't getting on very well?" And you going, "Well, what are you talking about?" And your wife, well, if it's my wife, she rolls her eyes and goes, "God, how do you not notice these things?" Well, I just don't. I'm just not very good at perceiving emotions, so I don't pick these things up terribly well. And other people are better at that. So perceive emotion is all about your ability to pick up in the moment how people are feeling, and to determine accurately which emotion you are seeing at any point in time. So could you distinguish between a guilty person and an ashamed person? So somebody has done something wrong, they're sitting in front of you. Are they guilty or are they ashamed? And how would you tell the difference? Guilt has a component of anger in it, so it's a harder emotion. So there will be some energy, some action, some propensity to act in the guilty person. Shame is a sad emotion, it's a down emotion. Feels like all the air has been taken out of somebody's body. So when you're looking at 2 people, can you tell this person is angry at themselves even? That's useful because all you have to do now is direct that energy. This person is ashamed, sad, no energy, lacking energy, unlikely that they're going to do anything to correct the situation. You have to provide the energy to get them going to correct the situation. So, guilt and shame are interesting because they're relatively close, but do you reckon you could really tell the difference by looking at somebody which emotion they were experiencing? The next one is the use emotion. And this is really about being in the emotion, not being in your head. This is reasoning with emotions, not about emotions. So being in your body with your emotions. So if we take a continuum, and I'm going to do tremendous damage to the theory now, but if we take a continuum from very sad to very happy, where do you sit on that continuum? Where are you most happy sitting? Are you up with the happy people? Generally, you're upbeat, you're preppy, you're in a good mood all the time, you look at the positive side, you jump out of bed with a pep in your step. And then when you see those negative people who have a negative view of the world, what do you see when you look at them? They're mood vampires, they don't want to be in your pity party, book yourself up, you need to, fight the good fight and give it the old college try. So are you looking at those people thinking, oh God, they just suck the life out of a room? Or maybe you're better off down here. Are you more comfortable with the negative side of the spectrum? So you tend to see the world as tough. You tend to see the world as challenging. You're going to glass half empty. You're a little bit risk averse. You're a little bit pessimistic. You notice bad stuff in the world. And when you look at the positive people, you're not looking up there thinking, oh wow, I'd love to be as chirpy as them. You tend to see shallow. People who have a negative perspective looking at positive people tend to think shallow. If only they knew what was really going on, they wouldn't be nearly half as trippy about the world. So it's not that one group sees the other group as its reference. It's not that one group wants to be more like the other group. They see very different things in each other, which makes it very difficult for the two groups to interact. And the more we know that I'm more comfortable in this part of the spectrum and you're more comfortable in that part of the spectrum, that will really help us to understand where we're coming from. So where do you sit on the spectrum? Where are you most comfortable? Or maybe you sit right in the middle, but in a very narrow band. Really don't let myself feel a whole lot of emotion. I don't really get too happy. I don't really get too sad. I keep it all very tight. There's no right and wrong position to be on this spectrum. There is an implication for leadership, though, in that it's very, very difficult to empathize with an emotion that you don't feel. You could cognitively empathize, and we're going to talk about cognitive empathy a bit later on, but what's it actually like to feel what that person is feeling? And we will talk a bit more about this later on, but a good example would be an angry person. What do we tend to say to angry people? What advice do we give them? We say, calm down. Yeah, you need to calm down. So, which I think there are probably two mistakes here. One is telling an angry person to calm down is not a good idea. And also the suspicion or the conclusion that you're the one who should tell them. Maybe that's not such a great idea either. So if you've ever been angry or really inhabited anger, being told to calm down is a terrible strategy. It really doesn't work, just makes the person more annoyed. But cognitively, that's the right answer, isn't it? They're angry, they need to calm down, so I'll just tell them, it's very logical. So people who can't use emotion, who can't really get into the feeling of the emotion, tend to give pretty off advice. It's advice that makes logical sense, but is not quite right because they're not in the emotion. The other thing that's very important about use emotion is, and this is where using emotion to facilitate cognition comes in very strongly. There are certain types of emotions that help different types of cognitions. So if it's a thing you want to be very creative and have a brainstorm, well then we all know you need lots of energy and lots of positive people. You can't come into a room and say, we're not going to have any bonuses or any pay rises this year. Now let's think about new business ideas, because the place is just down. And so thinking about what kind of mood are we in, what kind of mood am I in, what kind of thinking does that help with? Can I get myself into different moods? I know I have to do some positive creative work. I recognize in myself I'm not in a very cheerful mood right now. Can I get myself there? Because I know I need to be in a positive mood. I need to be in that creative mood. I need to be upbeat if I'm going to produce any good thinking. So use emotion is important for two things. The ability to move along that continuum so that you can empathize with people, critical for leadership. And secondly, the ability to leverage various different kinds of emotions in order to help various different kinds of thinking. The third part of this is understand emotions. Now this is actually the only part of the test where there is a consistent and statistically significant difference between men and women. Yes, you probably guessed it. Women score better on the ability to understand and use vocab around emotion than men. It doesn't mean that women are more emotional than men. That's a complete myth. It doesn't mean that women feel different emotions, feel emotion differently. There's no real science behind any of that. What it does say is when you ask people to explain emotion, women have much better vocab than men do, which is probably societally generated. It's a constructed difference. It's okay for women to talk, girls to talk about emotions, for women to talk about emotions. So they do, and they end up with really powerful vocab. It's not okay for boys or men to talk about their emotions. They tend not to, so they end up with very limited vocab. But it's not something that's to do with brain structure or, neurochemistry or any of that kind of stuff. It's a societally ordained, societally designed difference. So men feel as many emotions as women. They feel them as deeply. They feel them, they cut as deep. They laugh as hard. All that kind of stuff. But their ability to express that tends to be quite constrained. So for men who are managing, male leaders who are managing women, they tend to see, can say things like they're talking about their emotions a lot, or there's a lot of conversation about emotion going on, and that must mean they're more emotional. It's not. They just have better vocab. That's why they're talking more about it. And for women managing men, they can get the impression that these guys don't really care about what they're doing because they never talk about their feelings. They are having the feelings, they just don't have the vocab to talk about it necessarily, at least not to the same extent. Obviously, we're generalizing half the population of the world versus the other half. But generally, women score better on this part of the test. So what that's doing is asking you to explain your emotion. So if I said, what are you feeling? What kinds of words could you come up with? If you're not feeling great today, what are you going to say? I'm not, So are you already struggling to find a word? Do you just make sounds like, this kind of meta language? Or do you have good words? Well, I'm a bit depressed, I'm a bit sad, I'm a bit melancholy, I'm a bit blue, I'm a bit morose. I mean, who even uses words like that? So to what extent do you have kind of fancy language to describe your emotional life? And to what extent are you, if you're asking me, it'd be grand, very grand, not so grand, but beyond grand. I'm kind of struggling for language. So how fancy is your language? This is quite important in organizations because we make inferences about people's ability based on the sophistication of their language. People who talk a good game. So the extent to which you can talk about emotions, you can describe emotions, you can describe emotional life, you can describe the emotions of what's going on in teams, people will draw inferences about your ability to manage the emotional life of your team and to manage the people dimensions of your organization. For some organizations, that's very important. And for some organizations, less so. So you need to understand in your context, to what extent do the people around here care about, are interested in whether I can manage this emotional stuff? If it's very important to your organization, you need to be very conscious of the sophistication of your language. If it's not important to your organization, then it's not important to your organization. And getting better at this won't particularly help you in your current job, so you got to make a decision about what's where you put your energy. So an example would be, let's say something really bad has happened in your organization, like a bullying case, something very sensitive, and it's happened in your team. And the chief people officer and this chief exec are having a conversation over coffee about this thing that's just happened. And they say, and let's say I'm somebody who's very good at this emotional stuff. They would say, there's been this bullying case. Oh God, that's terrible. We hate that sort of stuff. We've no organizational tolerance for that. Where has it happened? And the HR person would say, it's happened on Colm's team. Well, we'll do it the other way. And let's say I'm not very good at it. I have a bad reputation around this stuff. Then the conversation between the CEO and the people officer goes something like, oh my God, isn't it bad enough that we have a bullying case, but it's happening on your man's patch? Keep him out of it. Get in there, take it over. You'll have to keep him informed because he's the line manager, but don't let him get involved. He'll just make it worse. So that's the person who is not very good at, doesn't have a good reputation around managing emotion. If you're kind of in the middle and you're kind of okay with this language stuff, but not great, the conversation sounds more like, that's a terrible thing to have happened. Let's partner with Colm, put the HR person in beside him. You can still stay involved, he'll still be part of the solution, but let's just make sure he's getting good advice and keeping on the tram lines, and he doesn't say anything that's kind of egregious, but partner with him and we'll work through this. If I'm on the other end of the spectrum, somebody who has a very good reputation around managing this kind of stuff, the conversation between the CEO and the people officer would sound more like, well, that's a terrible thing to have happened, but at least it's on his patch, at least it's on Colm's patch. In fact, if this had happened somewhere else, he'd probably be the guy we'd be sending in to help to clean it up. So, bad thing, and that's a horrible thing that happened, but we're pretty comfortable that he can run this thing. Just check in with him, make sure that he has all the advice and support he needs, but he's probably going to be able to manage through this difficult situation himself. So the sophistication of your language and your understand emotion ability dictates to a very large extent the reputation you develop in your organization around how well you handle this stuff. That's more or less important in different organizations. If it's very important for your organization, you need to make sure that you're very good at this stuff. The last part is manage emotions. So you've recognized that this person is angry. You know what anger feels like yourself. You understand why. You can put some good language around that. The manage emotion part is, well, what are you going to do about that? Like, do you have a strategy? Well, what's the approach now? It's all very well knowing this stuff, but nothing has happened in the real world yet. You haven't done anything. So what is your plan? Let's say you need to ask a favor from your boss. And you've noticed as she walked out of the car park this morning and slammed her door, this is probably not a good time. In fact, if you're the boss, if you're in a senior leadership position, how long do you think it takes for the people in your organization to know, are you in a good or bad mood today? It's kind of nanoseconds, right? Speed of light stuff, jungle drums. People will know almost before you get to your desk whether you're in a good or bad mood. So let's say your boss is in a bad mood, but you need to go in and either admit a problem or own up to a mistake or ask for a budget or ask a favor. What are you going to do? For a lot of people, it's wait. Systematic waiting. That's not a bad strategy. It can't be your only strategy. It's not a bad strategy. I'll wait until she's in a better mood. I'll wait until after the second cup of coffee. I'll let somebody else go in there first and get bawled out, and then she'll probably have gotten it out of her system, and then I'll go in later. So what's the plan? If you have to go into a room full of people who are not in a good space, can you get them up? If you have to go into a room full of people who are far too energized, can you bring them down? Can you direct that energy? What plan do you have? And there are good and bad ways to do that. There are lots of emotional levers that we can pull that allows us to figure out, okay, so in this situation, I'm going to go this way. In this situation, I'm going to go that way. But what are your strategies? If you're somebody who is good at this, you are probably getting asked. It's unlikely that you are secretly good at managing emotion. So if people aren't asking for your advice about how to manage emotionally laden situations, it's probably because they think that you don't have good advice to give. If people are coming to you all the time to say, well, how would I do this? How would I do that? Can I just run some stuff past you? You probably give good advice and keep giving that kind of advice. Particularly right now, be really, really conscious. The kind of advice that you would give to somebody who is in a stressful situation. Are you taking that advice yourself? Are you good at managing emotions in other people, but not good at managing emotions in yourself? So the manage emotion part has two components. Can you manage others' emotions? Can you manage your own emotions? And we find a lot, particularly with senior managers, that they spend a lot of time focusing on managing the emotional life of other people and completely neglect to take that advice themselves. So make sure that, imagine that somebody came to you and explained the situation that you're in. What advice would you give them? And imagine yourself giving that advice to somebody, and then just challenge, are you taking that advice yourself? Because it's probably pretty good. So we're going to bring this to life. I'm going to get you to watch a first bit of video. The video comes from a movie called Gladiator, which a lot of people have seen. We've cut down the first piece, so the video we're going to show you has a lot of the gory stuff taken out. I mean, it's a war movie, so it's a bit war-y, but there's some gratuitous gory stuff in it. So we've very good technical people here. A chap called Larry, who's actually behind the camera now, who has managed to edit the movie down for us so that we don't have to watch the gory bits because they're not germane to the points we're trying to make. So it's the opening battle scene from the Gladiator movie. This particular scene is set in northern Germania around 170 AD. It's a real battle. This battle actually happens. There's some parts of that movie are historically accurate, so this did happen in a place called Sutterberger Wald in northern Germany, 170 AD. And what we see in this movie is there's a revolt being led by a young, charismatic German leader called Arminius. And he has all of the rebels and all of the locals all fired up, and they're all in the woods, and they're going to take on these invading Romans. And the Romans are being led by our hero of today, which is Russell Crowe playing this Maximus character. He's the gladiator, and he's the general. So what we're going to look at is, what does he do? How does he lead his troops? What's his plan? How does he connect with people? How does he manage their emotions? How does he manage his own emotions? What is going on for that guy? Because we can talk about this for a long time, but the beauty of kind of Hollywood movie stuff is it really brings it to life for us, so we can really get an understanding of what's going on, and then we're going to talk about it. Remember, at the time, or bear in mind, the Romans had been fighting this war for 19 years. So the Romans were they were the first trading entity. They're like the Coca-Cola of their time. And what they wanted to do was to get rich. So they went in, they subjugated the population, they put in the soldiers, they imposed what was called Pax Romana, the peace of the Roman Empire, and that was to allow the Romans to trade with all these various outposts. They put their own people in place, they didn't rape or pillage, they needed to leave an economy in place so they could trade with it and they could all get rich. So that was broadly the Roman strategy. So they were trying to subjugate the population in order to put piece of the Roman Empire in so they could trade. Obviously you can't trade if your emissaries keep getting killed. So we're going to have a look at this battle. I'm going to ask you to just watch the video yourselves for a second. Think about, what example of leadership do you see? What does Maximus do to motivate his troops, and what's his strategy? And do you see anybody else showing leadership, or do you see anybody else not showing leadership? Once you've watched the video, I want you to have a chat with, again, whoever you're talking to in your circle, in your WhatsApp group, in your Hangouts. Just connect with a few people, talk about the video. What did you see? What did they see? Why did they see that as leadership? Why did they not see that as leadership? Just get a conversation going so that you have some interaction with this piece before I'll come back in the next section and we'll talk a little bit about the kinds of things that I saw in the movie, but maybe you saw different things. Okay, so enjoy watching the movie, but remember, it's not a popcorn moment. You have some homework. These 3 questions are your homework. Look out for these things in the movie. Thank you.
Not a sign.
How long has he been gone?
Nearly 2 hours.
Soldier! I ordered you to move those catapults forward. They're out of range.
Range is good.
A danger to the cavalry
Is acceptable. Agree? They say no.
People should know when they're conquered.
Would you, Quintus? Would I? Strength and honor.
Strength and honor.
Strength and honor. At my signal, unleash hell.
Load the catapults. Infantry form up for advance. Archers ready. Archers! North! North!
Atlas! 3 weeks from now, I will be harvesting my crops. Imagine where you will be, and it will be so. Hold the line. Stay with me. If you find yourself alone, riding in green fields with the sun on your face, do not be troubled. For you are in Elysium, and you're already dead. Brothers, what we do in life echoes in eternity.